Hello, President and CEO of MishBio. We're one of the co-hosts along with Ann Arbor Spark. First and foremost, this event couldn't happen without the gracious support, longtime support of Brinks Hofer, and more recently in the last year or so, the University of Michigan and their business development group. So thanks both to them for their support of this ongoing event. Just a quick announcement. We do have the annual MishBio Expo and Conference coming up this year. We're in Grand Rapids. It's the first time that we're back or repeating in a city. We're very excited to be back there. We've got a phenomenal program lined up, a very, very exciting keynote. The theme around the whole event is on personalized medicine, and we've probably got one of the most up-and-coming companies in that space, Genomic Health. Kim Popovits, the CEO, is going to be headlining the event. But more appropriately for many of you, those of you from the small companies, the Emerging Bioscience Showcase, where you get to present in front of the angel investors and the VCs and so forth. We need those. We'd like you to apply for those because we do pre-screen the applicants. And this year we're going to have 10 companies that will present in front of 3 or 4 judges. So we'd like to have you submit those presentations so that we can get to hear all the great things that are happening with your young companies. Also, if you're from the universities, we're interested in having you also present this, in this case, in a poster session where it's our attempt to try to bridge academia with industry. And this is particularly, I think, appropriate for those folks if you've gone through the MIE, M-I-I-E, funding application process, or otherwise if you're sort of got at least a toe or a little toe on that path to commercialization, we'd like to hear about what the great stuff that you folks are doing and planning. Tonight is actually, I believe we launch the fact that we're live or video streaming this event. This is a new thing that Ann Arbor Spark, courtesy of the Smart Zone tax dollars collected here locally, has gone to support, and hopefully this will be a feature, I think, of many, if not all, of Spark's events. But we get to kick it off here in BioArbor. So a little different from past times. If you want to ask a question, we ask that you go to the microphone right here, and so that can be captured appropriately by the videographers. So those are my announcements, and we're going to get the program going here. I'm actually tickled pink to have these two gentlemen here tonight. The steering committee several months ago was tossing around ideas for topics to kick off this season, and a lot of the questions that arose was, well, where's the life sciences, biosciences industry headed here in Michigan? And I can't think of 2 people more appropriate to have here tonight to try to begin to answer some of that type of question than Mike Finney, who is the president and CEO of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and Bill Parfit, who's CEO of MPI Research. And I presume all of you know who MPI Research is, and if you don't, well, shame on you. But Bill is a long-standing industry leader. He gave a phenomenal and very passionate discourse up in the Mackinac Policy Conference this year, and I couldn't think of anybody better to invite, and he was gracious enough to take time out of his busy schedule, as did Mike, to be here tonight. What I wanted to begin with, though, was kind of a backdrop before these two gentlemen sort of get into it. So if I could have the first slide. Oh, and I guess I was supposed to introduce and acknowledge all the steering committee members. My apologies to those individuals. Okay, the biosciences in Michigan. So when we're talking about biosciences, this is really what the scope is. Everything from ag, bio, and chemicals to drugs and medical devices, hospitals in certain terms of clinical research. A big segment is research and testing in medical labs, and then all underpinned by information technology. That's probably not much I have to explain further on that. Just to give you a flavor for where Michigan fits into the grander scheme of things. This is the most recent standings of regions nationally in terms of their biotech strength. The usual suspects and heavyweights are there: the Californias, the Texas, Marylands, Massachusetts. What is interesting to note, though, is that in the last couple of years, there's been some interesting states that have cracked that top 10. Most notably, Ohio. This is their second year in the top 10. 5 to 8 years ago, they were nowhere near. And Kansas has just this past year entered the top 10 as well. And the reason those are interesting, at least for me, from my standpoint, is because they're very similar to Michigan. And in fact, I would venture to say they probably have, at least in the case of Kansas, far less number of companies, of bio companies, than we do. But it's a telling sort of story, because once upon a time, we probably, if not in the top 10, we were in the top 15. And now we are much below that. To kind of give you a big picture map, literally, is sort of the big bioscience hubs nationally. Detroit makes it on the map. They're number 25. And I think that's what this entire map is, the 25 top hubs around the country for biotech, bioscience. Here in Michigan, we've got about 550 bioscience companies spanning that spectrum that I showed at the beginning. And obviously, about 2/3 of it is in southeast Michigan, in Oakland, Washtenaw, Wayne counties. Big hubs in Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids. Then sort of the mid-Michigan region, and then a smattering, as you can see, even up in the UP. And it's quite amazing what we have up there. Don't have time tonight to go through that. But 37,000 direct jobs. There's a multiplier, and we total out to about 140,000 one way or another. And it brings a lot to the economy. I mean, we're almost $9.5 billion the state's GRP. And based on a lot of analysis over the last few years, this is what we've been able to glean in terms of what are some of the important building blocks for growing the bioindustry. The states that have been most successful, i.e. those ones in the top 10, basically have strength in all of these facets. And I assume that we will be touching on these various elements tonight in the discussion. And one of the things we've been concerned, MishBio has been concerned about this whole topic for quite some time, certainly since I've been on board, since 2006. We, earlier this year, put together a sort of an action plan, a beginning action plan about the future of biosciences in Michigan, focusing on 3 sort of areas: improving the business commercialization climate, focusing on economic development efforts, and then, of course, on workforce and talent. And there are a lot of priorities listed within that. This was presented to the legislators, and it has certainly become a point of discussion. We, I think, noticed this to many of you earlier in the year, and if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to go to our website and read it. And a lot of the things that are in that plan really have filtered through an policy infrastructure that we now have in place, most notably the Bioscience Legislative Caucus, which in fact just met yesterday. And some of what we're talking about tonight did enter the discussion there yesterday. But it's not enough to have legislators that are interested. What's really important is to move legislation that can in fact impart and have impact for the industry. And that comes through subcommittees in both the House and the Senate. We had them in the previous session, and we're in the midst of reestablishing them currently, because there have been some structural changes in both the House and the Senate. But it was really the House side that was instrumental in having public hearings, and much of the testimony that was gathered then was distilled down into that future action plan that we put together. So I just wanted to kind of give that as a backdrop, because I think it's important to set the stage for the discussion tonight. So with that, I'm going to ask Bill to come up, and both of them are going to make some introductory comments. And then what I'll do is I've got some questions kind of prepped and ready to go to kind of begin the discussion, and then we'll throw it open to all of you for further Q&A. But again, once we get to that point, if you don't mind stepping up to the microphone so that this can all be captured. So, Bill?
Well, Well, thank you, Steve, and welcome everybody. It's good to be back in Ann Arbor. I was actually born here and spent a few years at school, so I feel I'm coming home tonight. So I've been asked to make comments, as Steve indicated, about the status of the biotech industry, but most importantly, to prove a hypothesis, and that's that if you're in drug development, the best place in the world to get your drug developed for better, cheaper, faster is Michigan. And you're going to leave here tonight, and I'm going to make believers out of all of you. Now, the other thing I'm going to prove to you is you can find anybody to make a point. So I've got a few slides that look even better than Steve's do. Okay? I just dug a little deeper in Wikipedia. No, I didn't use Wikipedia. Okay, so first, I guess I do that. So in terms of the first slide here, we all know the drill. My introductory comments are basically to just give you some background information so that they'll support the comments that I'll make during the Q&A. But we all know this drill because we're all involved deeply in it. But the issue is, what does it cost and how long does it take? So we all know what Tufts has done in terms of their first study at the $802 million. But now the general thinking is it takes 15 years and $1 billion. Well, we're all going to change that. I know I'm involved in a couple of biotechs in our side of the state, Metabolic Solutions being one that some of you may have heard of. We've spent $50 million. We're phase 3 ready, and we've done it in 4 years. So we can change all of this. When I say we, I don't mean me. I mean we can change all of this because this model here doesn't work as well as it can. The other thing I'll tell you is that we opened a laboratory in China. We're all afraid of China, how mighty China is going to come along and take this industry right away from us. Not a chance. No one can take an idea and commercialize it better than we can in this country, and even better right here in Ann Arbor. And I'm going to keep on this track and prove it to you. Okay, so the second item is that look what's happening to the biotechs now. So this is market value. So if you take the stock price times the number of shares that all these big pharmas have out, and you've seen how their prices have gone down, you can see that chart, that's represented here by big pharma. But look what's happened to all the biotechs. If you take all the biotechs and add up their market cap, it's now greater than big pharma. And why is that? The innovation engine for big pharma is sitting right in this room. And right in a lot of rooms around the world just like that. Big pharma doesn't have the ability. I'm not being critical. A lot of us all come from there. But the model doesn't work for where we need to go today. And if we're going to do it better, cheaper, faster, but cheap doesn't mean lousy or cut corners or anything else. It means more efficiency. And it's already starting to work. Now, the other thing that just shows on here is that, of course, the large pharmaceutical companies purchase a lot of the biotech so that normally in phase 3, and this just shows some recent purchases that we added onto the market cap here. So that's quite a revelation in my mind. The next thing is, take a look at this, and some of you may have seen it. 252 new drugs were approved by the U.S. FDA between 1998 and 2007. The newer data still supports this. Now, so if the 252 are, if you add this up with this, and here are countries across the bottom. So in all these countries, if you add it up, that's 252 new drugs that the U.S. FDA approved with the country of origin indicated here. Now, 58% of these new drug applications came from big pharmaceutical companies, 18% from biotech, 16% from universities transferred to biotechs, and 8% directly from universities that were transferred then through pharmaceutical. See how that works? But here's the interesting part. If you look overseas, this is the biotech sector right here. So this right here shows biotech. You don't see many biotechs around the world elsewhere, but look what's happening here. And actually, of the 118 drugs considered to be significantly novel new drugs, 44% were attributable to big pharma, and 56% were attributable to biotechs. Now that's telling a difference. So this story we've been waiting to happen, this thing, it's happening now. And then now let's just take, this is the last, I've got 3 slides to show this one. So I got this from Battelle. It was in-plan state-specific models that they did. This actually is, Battelle's the source. They did this in-depth analysis, and what they're trying to do is show the economic impact of a $20 billion change in pharmaceutical sector revenue and what impact that has on jobs. And to do that, they've taken the largest states in terms of direct state portion of this U.S. event, and they've done it in terms of employment impact. Total employment, direct employment, then with the multiplier, so that it shows, if you look right here, kind of how many people are involved in the biotech industry as a result of this study that they did. And the largest was California, some of the names you've seen before, New Jersey, Texas is on here, Michigan's down at the bottom. But you don't want to look in terms of states. But before we get to that, we want to show you how these numbers work. So if you just take Michigan, it says that, basically under this assumption, with this change, we've got roughly 5,000 people that would be impacted. But how many people are actually impacted by employment is impacted by the biotech sector in Michigan? And that number gets around what you said. You had over 100,000, right? And this kind of collaborates this other number smaller. But if you take that smaller number and you group them a little differently. Now, the reason I came to this was that after Pfizer bought the Upjohn company, then Kalamazoo said to itself, hey, what are we going to do? What's our future as a city? Because we no longer have the ownership of this great drug company in our town anymore. And we hired these consultants, and what they said, this washes out a little bit, is that there's 11 regions in the world that have the expertise for drug development. 11 in the world. I would have thought, if you'd asked me, I'd have said 40, 35, whatever. Well, it depends how you define a region. But if you take California just as a state, this shows the number of people directly involved in drug development. It's 28,000. I know that's a fairly small number, but that's directly involved. Not a lot of multipliers or anything else here. If you look at the Northeast, which includes New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, this whole region, that's 46,000. And the Midwest comes along, and there we are at 23,000. And you see Texas on these other charts. These are smaller numbers. Now, these aren't big numbers in and of themselves, but proportionally is what you have to look at. And this collaborates exactly what the consultant said about Michigan in this region. They said clearly of the 11 regions in the world, 3 of them are in the United States. One is California, which is shown here. The second is that pharma corridor on the East Coast, and the other one is right here in the Midwest. And that includes Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and Illinois. That's it, Illinois right here, Abbott and all that stuff, and G.D. Searle. So you add those together, and we've got the expertise, the know-how, and the knowledge. So don't count this area out. And what the consultant said and what we've seen is that the infrastructure is set up for that in terms of academic infrastructure, know-how, employment, exercise, etc. So there's a great story to be told for this region, and we just have to make sure that the funding is there, which we'll talk about, and that we can continue to support the capabilities that we have that are so important for the future of this activity. So that's just my introductory comments, and we'll elaborate on that as we go.
I'm Mike Finney, and thank you for allowing me to have a few minutes to offer a few comments. What I thought I would do is not try and give you any background because you know more about this than I do. But I thought I'd give you a chance to get some information in terms of what we're trying to accomplish at the state level and how we intend to support business growth in this state. The governor has been saying since day one that his top priority and our top priority as a member of his team is to focus on job opportunities in the state of Michigan. We know that our state has to become more of a knowledge-based economy, and that really touches on a lot of different sectors. Obviously, our job is more than just this particular sector. It covers everything. But knowing that we have resources in place to support what you're trying to do, knowing that we have entrepreneurial programs in place, facilities like what Ann Arbor Spark has and our friends down in Detroit at Tech Town, over in Kalamazoo, throughout the state, all the great facilities and resources that we have are going to be key to our ability to support all of you in what you're trying to do. We've got 3 basic things we're trying to accomplish as an organization and as a state. We're trying to ensure that entrepreneurs have the resources they need to grow, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We're trying to ensure that existing companies in the state have the highest potential for growth. We know that existing companies in our state really represent the highest potential for us to dramatically change Michigan's economic fortunes. When we look at data, Michigan has probably 90% of its companies are relatively small, probably like most of you in this room. The employment base is something between 10 and a couple hundred employees. Who's in a company right now that's larger than that? 1 or 2, right? And if I look around the room, that probably represents 90+% of you who are actually in those kind of companies. So even this room bears out the kind of data that we look at and that we see. And then the third thing we're trying to do is we're trying to find opportunities to bring new businesses to our state. Companies that really fit, that where there's a technology, talent, and other quality of living aspects that make sense for this region. So it's entrepreneurs, it's existing business growth, and it's bringing new business here. Let me focus for a second on what we're trying to do to help the businesses that are here. That really applies to all of you. We've got a program that we call Pure Michigan Business Connect. The idea behind that is to really take a page from my good friend out in Littleton, Colorado, who invented a program called economic gardening, but to take it to a whole nother level. Right? So traditionally what we did, if you came to the MEDC, and many of you have, I recognize a lot of faces here, you'd come to the state and you'd say, I need help. I want to grow my business here. How can you help me? Now at one point we had some funds that we could invest in your company through the Life Science Corridor, the Tri-Corridor, and now the 21st Century Jobs Fund. Well, those programs have dried up in many respects, and we're trying to find other creative ways to help you. But for the most part, we offer companies tax credits. And those tax credits for the kinds of companies that you're trying to start up have been pretty useless, right? And if you're a company that needs cash up front to get going, a tax credit that has a 15-year tail on it is not going to do you a lot of good. I'm looking at my good friend Jack Ball here laughing because we offered Jack, at least not during my time, but before, we offered them an awful lot of tax credits, right? Most of which are not collectible, most of which don't meet the immediate need that you have. We also typically offer, when we did offer some kind of debt facility or instrument to help you financially, it ended up being something that was not terribly useful or that just simply didn't understand your business type. So what we're trying to do with existing businesses is we're trying to fix that. The first thing that we decided to do is to eliminate the business tax that most of your companies had to deal with. So if you're a C Corp, and how many C Corps do we have in the room? There's a few. Now, most of you will eventually become C Corps when you do your big exits and all that kind of stuff. But for now, you're not C Corps, and that means you're not subject to the Michigan business tax or any business tax in Michigan. And even C Corps now are facing only a flat 6% tax. Now, what is the reason behind that? The logic behind that is that we want you to take this $1.8 billion, that's the overall reduction in the business tax, and we want you to use it to grow your businesses here in the state of Michigan. That's money you get to keep. It's not a tax credit that goes on the long tail that takes you forever to collect, assuming your business becomes successful. It's money you get to keep right now. We've also got some really interesting loan and investment programs that we've been working on. If you're a company that has some significant assets, we've got loan programs that can help you. We've got money that we've now started to accumulate based on returns that are coming in from the 21st Century Jobs Fund. We call it the Permanent Fund. Most of you probably haven't heard of the Permanent Fund. In fact, when I was at Ann Arbor Spark, I never heard of the Permanent Fund. But it's there. And we've got a substantial amount of money, and its only use is to make loans and investments in companies in the state of Michigan. We can't do anything else with it. And we've been sitting on it, not putting it to work in companies like yours. So we have resources that can help companies like all of yours move the needle with the upfront resources that you need in order to be successful. We're also, as a part of our toolkit for economic gardening or the Michigan Business Connect, we're going to help you connect with customers. I've had a couple folks approach me tonight and say, hey, I'd love to be able to meet with company A and share with them some of the cool stuff that we're doing that can help them move the needle with their products. And is that something you can help facilitate a conversation for? And the answer is yes. We'll do that now. And that was a risk that we normally would not have taken. Why? Because we'd hate to make a bad introduction, right? If we introduce, company A to, GE or some other big company, and as it turns out your product is a dud, we lose a little bit of favor. Now that's if you are a traditional thinking organization. But we're an entrepreneurial organization, and entrepreneurs take risk. And we know that in taking risks, we're going to have failures sometimes. But if we do our jobs right, we're going to have more success than we will have failures, and we'll create more opportunities for all of you to get the connections with companies that you want. So we're going to be looking for you to put the pressure on us to deliver on some of the things that I'm talking about. We're going to be a resource to help you find talent. One of the things that we discovered when I was at Ann Arbor Spark was that talent was the most important thing that you could connect with when you were trying to get a business off the ground, or frankly, grow one. And so we put in place a talent initiative that would really go out and find the key talent that companies need. Now, we weren't always successful, but we had more success than we did failures. You know, Pfizer decided to pull out of town and displace 2,100 plus people. And some 600 of those or so, we ended up finding other interesting opportunities for because we had this talent component in place. Sometimes they were entrepreneurs who founded companies like, Jerry Cox did with his partners. Sometimes it was folks who were looking for other opportunities, and we were able to connect them with companies that were throughout Southeast Michigan and the state of Michigan. Sometimes people had to pack in and move, and we helped in that regard too, because we always thought that it was better for people to have opportunities and stay connected to Michigan than not. So we're at the state level, we've decided to scale what we did here at Ann Arbor Spark and really become a tool that can provide the kind of entrepreneurial talent support that you're going to need to grow your business. So essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to reinvent the way we do everything. The governor at a broader level is reinventing the state of Michigan. Our piece of that is to reinvent the way that we support companies. It's to focus on tools that matter up front. We've got $100 million. This is a really cool thing. We've got $100 million that was appropriated from the legislature this year to help us provide incentives to companies that want to grow in our state. We have never had a cash tool before. We've always had tax credits. So imagine what we can do now when we talk to companies, and we can say that up front, we've got a resource that can help you. Now, we're getting close to doing some deals. And the kinds of conversations that we're having with companies make it clear to us that we won't have to offer the very expensive tax incentives that really will live for the next 20 years, for my children to pay off, your children to pay off, and maybe even our grandchildren to pay off. We're going to be able to do things that have an impact that's upfront and now so that companies can get going and hire the people and grow businesses the way we know they can grow here in our state. So we're pretty excited about it. We've got a great team of folks at MEDC. I would encourage you to get connected with our team. It's folks like Martin Dober, Michael Hagan, Paula Sorrell. Some of you know Paula. She was one of the TDC consultants and also an Ann Arbor Spark consultant. And others who have this as their day in and day out responsibilities to get to know you and find creative ways to help you grow your business. And we feel it's our responsibility to be a resource and to help as opposed to simply being a mouthpiece. And we're going to challenge you to challenge us. Thank you.
Great, thank you to both for those introductory comments. The first question I wanted to kick off with, and Bill, you set sort of the stage of this in terms of describing some of the key elements that we have here in Michigan. But I wanted to hone in a little bit deeper and see if I can pull out of both of you how you view specifically the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the challenges that the bioindustry specifically here in Michigan has. That's a little bit of a tough question, but as you talk with your fellow bio CEOs around the state and all that, and the small biotechs that I know you interface with, what are you hearing insofar as those things?
Well, of course, at MPI, because we do work for so many different companies around the world, on any given day now we're up to about 650 to 750 different biotech companies who come to us for a lot of their preclinical and discovery needs. I get to talk to CEOs and some of the chief scientists from all over the country. And they comment about Michigan and what we have here. And I'm pretty open about my excitement for where we are. I've got a rich heritage here, obviously. But in terms of talented people, good integrity, hardworking, you can't beat it right here. And a lot of you probably have come from the coast. Now, the coasts have one thing that we don't have, but we've got talent, we've got know-how, we've got educational infrastructure. That all is a strong component to what we have to do. Even getting lab techs, I've worked with Western Michigan University on their curriculum to mold their lab, to mold their life science curriculum to meet our lab tech needs when they start as their first job. So that's all helpful to keep this drug development skill set that we have here alive and distributed so that it's not just in the hands of one or two big companies that can get gobbled up overnight, but it's distributed broadly and widely among the many biotechs that operate here. The one missing ingredient, and I know you want to talk about this later, obviously, is capital. And over in our part of the state, we put together a Southwest Michigan First Life Science Fund just to offer capital in to companies that show promise in terms of their drug development capabilities. And that's, I think, Mike, what you were commenting on and alluding to, we have to work on next. And both ourselves and a couple of the others, one up in Grand Rapids and one in Detroit, are talking about how we can collaborate together and form a second fund and even a third fund, and then offer ourselves as the local clearinghouse for the larger funds that exist on either coast. Because what we're starting to see now is some of these large venture funds and even private equity funds on both the West Coast and East Coast begin to realize that there is opportunity in the Midwest. And although they like to be able to just drive to an investment opportunity in the next couple hours away, we're offering that clearinghouse capability in Michigan, and it's starting to get some traction. So we're looking at for next year, seeing if we can't really put a fairly significant fund together privately that would include monies then from both coasts, so that we could continue to feed the great skill sets that we have here.
Yeah, but the only thing that I would add to Bill's comments, I think we definitely have some challenges when it comes to keeping the wonderful innovations that we have here. And sometimes that's due to talent, particularly the management talent that's needed. I hear that over and over again. In many cases, it is tied to access to capital. And so I think we need to continue to work on those things. We need some creative programs to support the wonderful talent that we have here in the state. We've seen a few of our companies move on to those significant exits only to be moved away from our state. So talent is probably, senior management talent in particular is probably one of the areas that I would highlight as a need. Talking about the strengths, I think there are many, and I hear it over and over again. We've got, very smart people, very innovative people, great universities. We're starting to build an ecosystem that can support it, on most fronts. And again, Bill has probably outlined the key weaknesses, and the biggest one being access to the capital that you're going to need.
Okay. Well, and this next question, Mike, you know this well, as you were sort of one of the key, if not the architects, and certainly the key implementer for the Life Sciences Corridor Fund about 10 years ago or so. And back then, because of that fund, it became very visible nationally. And that's when Michigan was managed to be up in that upper tier of states as being recognized for strengths here in the industry. Then, as you noted, that became the Tri-Corridor, and then became the 21st Century Jobs Fund. And each step of the way it sort of got diluted, at least in terms of visibility. Despite the fact that over that whole course, I think all told, and you can correct me on this, there was about $325 million that went to the bio companies in terms of the MDC loans and grants and so forth. And it became sort of, at least nationally, became out of sight, out of mind. We became out of sight, out of mind. So how do we regain that visibility? How do we get ourselves back up on that, the top 10, top 15 list, and tell the world that what we have here, and how do we get to be, more competitive in that global space?
Well, I don't know if top 10, top 15 is an easy thing it's not easy for me to understand, because when I look at the data that you have on the screen, and then one of the slides that Bill had where it showed Michigan's relative position in terms of the biotech industry, I just found myself asking the question, are we reaching our potential? So if our potential as a state is to be a top 10 state, then obviously we should be striving for that. And I think the leadership that you're providing with the association and all of you that are actively involved really ought to help us understand at the state level what our potential is. Because what we're trying to do is we're not trying to pick winners necessarily, because that's a very, very difficult thing to do. I think that's what ended up being the doom of the Life Science Corridor, the Tri-Corridor, et cetera. So we can't pick winners and losers, but you have to cause us with good data, and I can tell you this governor understands data more than anything else, but with good data to show us what the potential is for this industry, and you'll find that we're supportive. We will be supportive of helping us get there. But not understanding that, of course, is a challenge. And so what we get is we get a lot of numbers, we get comparisons. It's not even clear to me if those rankings, in fact, are based on data as opposed to just, opinions. Because opinions are important because it's about our perceptions. But it doesn't tell the story of whether you really have what folks understand that you do. And when I look at the data on the screen there, the number of companies, the number of jobs, those are pretty impressive. And I'd like to just understand relative to other states, are we coming close to our potential, or what is the right target for our potential? And then how do we best support that is something that we then have a dialogue about.
Well, just quickly before I have Bill comment, those are based on numbers, and as a former scientist, I'm data-driven, and I've always taken those kinds of rankings with some skepticism, and so I scrutinize them closely, and you have to be careful how you certainly look from one ranking to another, but those at least are certainly based on some pretty hard data. So, but I'm sure there's always room for interpretation. Bill, any comments?
Yeah, I'm going to take just a minute to explain a little different view on this. So what Mike said, and I don't mean to stand up, but it just helps my back. What Mike said and commented on is right. You can't pick winners and losers. And so a lot of states, when they do economic development, they say, well, we want to get into renewable energy, or we want to get into oil, or we want to get into new batteries. Well, we made those same mistakes here in Michigan. We figured if we picked the right industry and it hit, it'd be a home run, and it would nirvana. We'd go from being automotive now to alternative energy. That doesn't work, and I agree with Mike, and he said that exactly right. And the reason is you can't pick the winners because you don't know what someone's working on in some other corner of the world, and you've kind of put all your eggs in one basket. Now, the Business Leaders for Michigan is a group of the largest employers in the state who've put together a turnaround plan for the state, and it complements what the Snyder administration has put together, and it talks about what it takes to really create jobs in this state. And we put the plan together starting 4 years ago. And basically, the starting point for this plan was a goal. We need a goal. Well, what should be our goal? Well, 2 generations ago, Michigan was one of the top 10 states in the country for economic growth and job creation. Now, by almost any count, as you've seen, we're number 48 or 47 or 50. In some cases, if you include the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., we're 51. So it's not something to be proud of. And also, of all the jobs that have been lost in this country, manufacturing jobs lost in this country since the year 2000, half of them have come out of Michigan. You've heard these statistics before. So that's not strong. So we clearly have to reinvent ourselves, as the Snyder administration and Mike and all are working so hard to do. But these business leaders have put this plan together, too. And so our goal is to return to that top 10 status. And so a lot of the things that are happening are consistent with the goals that have been merged between Business Leaders for Michigan, as you know, and also with Governor Snyder's plan. And it's starting to feel better. Even with this new tax change, we've jumped from kind of also random up in the top quartile. But the thing that the business leaders are starting to now look at is what should Michigan look like 15 years from now? And so we've identified what education should look like, et cetera. And the one thing that they were willing to include in that was drug development, because that's part of our heritage. It's not picking a winner. It's recognizing a skill set, as I talked about before, that exists in only 3 other regions in the country and only 11 regions in the world. And to walk away from that would be a mistake. So the plan that we're going to come out with next year, the business leaders, it talks about what Michigan should look like going forward, will include the biosciences and drug development as one of the cornerstones of the 10 things that we're emphasizing for the next 15 years. And that should hopefully bring funding to the state to support that, but also provide for educational investment and the appropriate investment in the scientists to continue to feed this heritage and this expertise that we have. So I hope you're excited about that, because that plays right in to what we all do together, without compromising the fact that we're not going to try to pick winners.
I'll just add on to that from my own experience in dealing both with the MEDC in the state as well as with the business leaders in Michigan. There's been a sea change of attitude and, more importantly, action since January. in terms of their interest and their support for the industry and recognizing its impact and potential growth for the state. In fact, Doug Rothwell from the Business Leaders in Michigan specifically got in touch with me several weeks ago, and both of you know Doug a whole lot better than I do, but was rather, he put a stranglehold on me to provide him with some really, really hard data to make the case and build that piece of the plan. And first of all, I was heartened by the fact that we were being included, because that was a positive step that I had not seen before. And so I certainly look forward to that final product and what it's going to be all about.
You know, Stephen, I want to make one other point, because when I talk about us doing business a little bit differently, this actually is a bit of a self-serving opportunity for Stephen and MichBio, and I think he understands that. Because what I've asked our team to do is to focus on things that we do that we really need to. Those are things that we call core to the MEDC. So we have $100 million that we need to use as incentives to help businesses grow. We're not going to turn that over to one of our partners like a MichBio and ask MichBio to distribute it. We're going to do that. We think it's important for us. It's a core activity that we have to provide. But there are certain other things that we really don't have the in-house domain expertise to really guide. And we're going to ask partners to help guide us toward that. So when I say we want you to help us figure out what the potential is for this, that will guide our thinking in terms of how we go after resources to be allocated to it. And so we're going to be looking to MichBio to do that. And our team, we've got a big meeting coming up with Stephen next week to sit and talk through the kinds of things that we want MichBio to do to help guide our direction in terms of how we support the life sciences sector. Because it's unclear right now if the 50 million that was being distributed 10, 12 years ago as a part of the life science program is the right resource and the right structure or something else. And we have to figure that out sooner rather than later so we can properly support this sector.
I appreciate that. I was trying to be the humble, and not bring too much attention, but actions speak louder than words. So I'm looking forward to that meeting next week. Well, you touched on a couple of times now that $100 million permanent fund. I was going to focus on the 21st Century Jobs Fund, but that seems to be sort of passé. And so the question really then is better suited towards the relative to that permanent fund. If you can be a little bit more specific about how you envision that money is going to be sort of, allocated. Obviously, the 21st Century Jobs Fund had a certain process, and there was, I think, all sorts of issues related to both the review, the execution, and so forth, relative to terms and conditions for VC firms and so forth. You know all that. How about the permanent fund? What's going to be different, and what can these folks kind of expect from that?
Right, yeah, so we're estimating the permanent fund to be someplace on the order of $68 million or so. The $100 million is a total separate appropriation that we've gotten from the legislature. So for returns that have come back from successful companies or successful investments that have been made over the years with the life sciences resources, the permanent fund is actually the recipient of that. We also have a recurring revenue stream that flows to the permanent fund. But the long and short of it is the money has to be used as investments or loans to companies or entities here in the state of Michigan. It should be used in line with the 21st Century Jobs Fund criteria. So we've got, I think, 5 or 6 industry sectors that were identified in the 21st Century Jobs Fund. And so the first question you're going to ask is, well, wait a minute, you're picking winners and losers again. Well, don't worry about it because biosciences or life sciences is included. So that's point number 1. But number 2 is that the legislature, as a part of revising the 21st Century Jobs Fund, added a couple other sectors. They added IT and software, they added agriculture, and they also created an opportunity for the Michigan Strategic Fund to add other sectors as they are identified by business in our state. So we think we have it covered. And I actually chair the Michigan Strategic Fund board, so if we identify another sector that needs the resource, we can, in fact, make appropriate accommodations. The intent is to use that money based on your business needs. It's not to simply hand out grants. In fact, I'm kind of anti-grant for the most part. I like making loans. I like making investments. I like creating an opportunity so that if you're successful, we have an opportunity to do it again with the next company that's coming. And when we simply dole out grants, it's very difficult to create a sustainable pool of resources. And frankly, if you're wildly successful, pretty cool that you would be able to pay the money back so that others can be successful as well. So we're looking to provide that money in a variety of different forms based on the needs of the businesses that we're talking to. Right now we have a portfolio of companies that came through the various programs, 21st Century Life Science Corridor, et cetera. We're going to be looking to some of those companies to see if there's opportunities to make follow-on investments in them. We're going to be looking to do some things that might be microloans, where there are companies who just need a little bit of money to build a prototype or something else. We'll be looking to do microloans. And so we really want to be as flexible as we can. We'll have some announcements coming out over the next couple of months or so that will provide more detail. I don't want to get too far in front of our team. But it really is intended to be very flexible. We don't intend to put in place real hard and fast structure around how deals can be done, but rather we want to make the resource available to you based on your business's needs.
It's good to hear. Yeah, and just for all of you to note, you mentioned microloans. When you renewed the support to Ann Arbor Spark to administer the pre-seed capital fund, the microloan component of that for life sciences is actually going to be worked through MishBio in terms of reviews and recommendations. So we're very excited about that. Bill, to your point, you mentioned about drug development being a component of the business leaders in Michigan. In our action plan, we actually identified similar. I don't think the state has bothered to take the time to understand and identify our areas of strength. And clearly drug development, the contract research organization network that we have that I think is second to none in the country. We also identified clinical trials. I mean, that's a huge business that has really gone very much under the radar screen. And for those of you who aren't aware of it, Michigan is number 10 in the country for the number of trials. And we think that that can be grown even more by perhaps harmonizing IRB agreements and what have you. And we've gone so far as to put together a clinical trials committee of various stakeholders around the state to figure out, well, what can we do to make it easier for sponsors? And not only that, but what can we do to make it easier for patients to come on board? I'm going to ask one last question, then we'll open it up. Also a money question. Beyond just that fund, what other incentives, what's the state doing in terms of investment, capital formation, the fund of funds, supporting angel investors, that kind of thing? You had initiated the one, and I believe now there's a second round of it that's been started. Has all the monies that were allocated to the VC firms then in turn been expended and to the biotech companies, or is there still money that hasn't been
So if Stephen continues to ask questions, I'm going to explain everything that we're thinking about doing with our permanent fund.
We promise to keep it a secret.
Okay, good. So there are a few things that we've done. First of all, through the 21st Century Jobs Fund round that was just completed, Ann Arbor Spark and I'm going to say Southwest Michigan First, but I got it wrong, right? What was the organization in Kalamazoo that got the pre-seed funding? BRCC? Yeah, BRCC. So BRCC and Ann Arbor Spark collectively got about a little over $13 million to continue this pre-seed fund activity. That's been going on now for nearly 5 years. I think at last count, there's probably 60 to 70 investments that have been made. And both organizations are following a similar pattern in making those investments. So that's some of the earliest stage money that's being made available. That's ready, and we're in the process of negotiating contracts right now. The money is all been appropriated, and so within the next 30 to 60 days or so, those organizations ought to have that money and be available to make investments in your company. They do have some criteria. I'll leave it up to you to talk with those organizations about the criteria they're using, but that's about $13 million of capital that's immediately available. It does require matching money, so in effect, there's a multiplier in terms of how much will ultimately be available because you're going to have to find some other private capital. We also did some accelerator funds where we, for a couple of different organizations who were able to raise $1 million of private capital, we matched it with $6 million of state money so that in effect they'd have a minimum of a $7 million fund. We actually think that's a reasonable model, but frankly, we're changing it a little bit. And so we'll probably offer some organizations an opportunity to raise money and if they hit milestones, then we'd be willing to make some kind of an investment. I don't want to say that we're going to go 6-1. In fact, I seriously doubt that we go 6-1. But maybe we do something like 1-1. So there will be opportunities for other folks who are trying to do startup funds where we will be willing to participate in some way or another, probably to provide some upfront operational money. In fact, most of you probably don't know the relationship that I developed with Jan Garfinkel when she was starting up Arboretum Ventures, or Raj Katari when he was starting up Silicon Partners. But when I was at MEDC the first time around, Riley Coppola was there with me as the director of the Life Science Corridor, and we put in place a program that provided, I think it was $150,000 for a couple of years to help some aspiring venture capitalists raise funds here in the state of Michigan. And as it turns out, those were the two successful applicants, Arboretum Ventures and Seneca Partners. And I think if you know anything about the industry, you know what they've done, right? And it was a very limited amount of resource we gave them. And it wasn't as an investment. It was to help them get up and running and do the fundraising activities, et cetera. I like that model a lot. Don't know if that's the right one, but in addition to doing something like that, we'd also be willing to make a direct investment because, again, the money we have in the permanent fund can be an investment. It can be an investment in a company. It can be an investment in a venture capital fund. So we've got some options in terms of how we do that, and we'll be looking to do it. So we just want to be creative and try and leverage the resources that we have as aggressively as we can so that companies can take advantage.
Bill, do you like what you're hearing?
I do, but it has to be a partnership not only with what the state does, but also the private sector. And with the plans that a couple of us are talking about now, there's a fund in Grand Rapids called the Hope and Fund, the Southwest Michigan First Life Science Fund, and the Renaissance Fund, I think that you were alluding to, are all going through another round. And what we're going to make sure we do this time is reach out, as I said before, to the coasts, to the East Coast and the West Coast, and get these investors excited and tell them that they ought to have diversification in their portfolio that ought to include this Midwest Center for Drug Development that I showed on the screen. And we've tried that on a couple of them, and it's working. So I think that between what the state is doing, what MEDC is doing, what the private sector is doing, we can focus now upon the capabilities that exist in this room and in this state and in this region, and I think that will bring the money and also the investments that we need. And, of course, a couple home runs would help, too. And nothing succeeds like success, obviously. And so as we get these successes, and there are some of them that I'm aware of that are pretty close, that will really shed some nice light on this. And I know from the private sector side, we plan to take full advantage of that to put a strong spotlight on this area is what our capabilities are.
Well, something must be happening because in the last month alone, I've had 3 VC firms, 2 from the West Coast, 1 from the East, that we've never seen here before, come knocking on my door, meet with me, and walk away somewhat shell-shocked once they've heard the opportunities, not just in pharma, but devices and ag biotech and so forth, and walked away with a short list of company names and my commitment to give them, to make the connections so they can follow up. So I haven't seen that to that kind of level in the past. So something must be happening.
And the thing that they're telling you is that probably that we're hearing as well is a pretty well beaten path, along the East Coast and West Coast. So they've tried going into Texas or into Florida and some of those other areas. When they come here, they really see something now that has some substance to it, and that's what's got them excited.
All right, questions? Up to the mic, please, if you don't mind. Go ahead, Curtis.
To Bill, I'm sure you know that the pharmaceutical industry has a huge productivity problem with investments going up and approvals generally going down since about 1997. What actionable causes might you see that we can address this problem from right here in Michigan?
Of course, there have been books written on this one. From my standpoint now with MPI, as we become more of a global company, and I have the opportunity to interface with a lot of the regulatory agencies around the world, and China being the most recent example when we set our laboratory up there, and I worked with the SFDA, the Chinese FDA, and I kept telling them that the reason MPI is coming here, we're going to bring our knowledge, our expertise, our regulatory capabilities, and finally one night after a few of those strong drinks they like to serve, He said, we don't want what you have in the U.S. We can't afford it. And that never dawned on me before. You know, we've got the best system. It's safety, efficacy, all that is top notch. But yet then we were approached by the Brazilian government to help them start their own drug development capability. Why? Because they can't afford what we do. But yet, look at those slides. The solution is right in this room. If, to your point, if we continue to look at big pharma, which because of its huge size, thought that economies of scale were going to improve the lot, improve efficiency, it hasn't. Now I think we recognized that a more diversified group, diffused group, singularly focused on a couple molecules or one platform can be a lot more productive. And that type of model is the one that is going to provide the future for us. That earlier chart I showed, you saw the activity in this country compared to other countries. This country still owns the drug development worldwide, and we want to keep it that way. Now, one reason it's that way is because we've got the most the freedom of pricing in our prescription pharmaceutical marketplace, which is another problem, social problem that's been created. So you mix all this together, it's not smooth sailing. But if you allow markets to exist on their own, where private sectors can come to groups like yourself, with small companies like you have, and let you pursue in a focused way well into the late hours of the night instead of having an empty parking lot at 5:05, I think that this change will take place. And there's every evidence to believe that it is now taking place. And so that once again, as a country, but importantly to me and I think to you, as a region, we can reestablish how viable we can be with this new model in terms of developing drugs in a very productive way. As I mentioned before, this company that I'm closely involved with now from a couple of my former colleagues at the Upjohn Company, and we're well along with a nice product for type 2 diabetes. The market for that is huge, and we have not spent, compared to some of those statistics I showed, that much money, and we're close. I mean, it's exciting. And I know a lot of you have similar aspirations. Don't give up. Keep going, because once we get a few of these to tip and we get the proper attention, I think the money will definitely follow, and so too will the support we need.
David?
David Weaver with Great Lakes Angels, and also CEO of a startup medical device company here in Michigan. Three things for food of thought. And to start with, I'd like to commend MEDC for the support they gave to a comment I gave 2 years ago at MichBio, that we ought to educate more angel investors in Michigan to what they could do with the revenue they have, what this asset class is all about, so you can put money into this, and also for helping us get through the small business tax credit, so angels on the fence that haven't done this before can move into this space and take advantage of the return they can get and mitigate some of the risk with a tax credit. But things for thought here is that Pat Moran in Kalamazoo and myself both spent time at the Pittsburgh Life Science Greenhouse. Pittsburgh and in Pennsylvania in general, they took tobacco money and put 100% of it, taking gamble, picking winners, into life science greenhouses scattered across the state. And a lesson I learned from that was that when they focused on an industry, which we have a strength here in Michigan, and put together a talent of standby CEOs like myself and Pat to help mentor those companies and grow that space, and had a pool of money we could put in at 10 or 25K, into a company to help them get proof of concept or write a business plan and stuff like that. We really helped that industry grow in that space with seasoned veterans that had like 25 years or more in large companies and startup companies to help them mentor that. And unfortunately, it was region specific. It was Western PA. Michigan I don't want us to be regional. I want us to be statewide winners. It'd be nice if we had the ability to put together some kind of angel early stage fund, not VC fund, but really early stage fund that's run by the private sector, that runs and puts money into early stage companies. I don't know if we can do that. Now, when you also, if you look at Ohio Tech Angels in Ohio, they have state matching funds against the fund they have. They had to get a track record to show they could make good investments, and the state came into their fund and did matching against their fund. They have tax credits there. So they're doing gangbusters with that money down there and really building it. But they're limited to doing Ohio deals. Now, I'm a charter member of the Angel Capital Association. I know angel groups around the country and some overseas. I went to them, Dave, we love your deal, but we can't do it. You're not in Ohio. I've tried pitching our startup that I have, medical device company based here in Ann Arbor. And I think this taught me a lesson that I started when I ran Great Lakes Angels early on, is that angel investors only invest in things that they understand. That makes sense. If you came out of the auto industry, you do that. If you came out of IT, you do that. Well, we're missing the boat. I think something that we should do that I tried to start a long time ago was take all the angel groups around the state and force feed them information on the life sciences by having people from that sector, VC funds that are follow-on funds, just not our own state funds, but follow-on funds, come and talk to them what's happening in medical devices, what's happening in IT, what's happening in therapeutics and stuff like that, educate them in what's going on in the sector. I had Rick Schneider, when he was still in Ardesta, come and talk to our group about MEMS and small technology. And all of a sudden, the eyes, lit up in the folks. I didn't know, there was a place to exit in that MEMS and nanotechnology. Now I understand it. If I see a deal in that space, I might make an investment in it. So I think it would behoove us statewide to get education programs in place to go to the angel groups and give them an education on some of the basics of what's going on in the life science area, where the winners are, where the follow-on funding can come from, so people are less reluctant to invest in that space, and also identify leaders in that space that can kind of learn more about it and follow them to do the due diligence to close on some of those things and make a decision. It's look at maybe doing some matching funds for funds in the states. We have state funds, but let's get private sector funds and maybe match some of those. Let's get more education out to the folks. And let's try and, get more money driven into the space where we do have winners and have a large opportunity to get a return. Those are my thoughts.
Mike, you want to comment?
Yeah, about the only thing that I can say, David, is that we're very receptive to the suggestions that are coming our way. The model that we've tried to put in place as MEDC is one of listening to individuals and organizations throughout the state that really can help guide the direction that we take. As an example, we've been working with 15 regional economic developers that cover the entire state of Michigan. Every idea, everything that I'm talking about has all been vetted with them. So when we decide to roll out a program for the permanent fund, in terms of how to use that investment, it's been fully vetted with these regional economic development partners, where they are talking to, in fact, I expect that they're talking to the companies in their communities and understanding what the issues, the challenges, and the opportunities are. How should we be structuring resources? They're talking to the universities in their communities. They're talking to the angel investors. They're talking to the VCs to the extent that they're there, so that as we structure our resources, they're doing it with the ideas in mind that's coming from the communities that they serve. So we're really trying to get this thing right by being as much listeners as we are doers. And so I'm not offering up anything that was an original innovation from MEDC. For the most part, it's been coming from our partner organizations. So I'm very receptive to what you just said in terms of how to find ways to get the private sector more involved into sponsoring more angel education and other things. Ironically, I was talking with the group up in Midland about some of the things they're doing. They're actually now partnering in Grand Rapids because they see some opportunities there to educate about the kinds of products that they're interested in and vice versa. So some of that's starting to happen. I think it's a wonderful idea, and we're very receptive to it.
Well, one last question. Anybody? You? If not, then I'll throw one in. You just mentioned, because you just gave me a thought, and it was something that we discussed at the steering committee. Speaking of different regions, there's been, for a long time, there's been silos. And one region not talking to another, or there's been a lot of rhetoric. Yeah, we partner and collaborate, but in fact we don't. What can be done, what is being done to change that, to really bring the various regions, especially within specific industries like ours, together so that we're all working towards sort of common economic, outcomes?
I think Bill can probably respond to this question better than I can, because the work that they're doing with business leaders from Michigan, it really is not about business leaders for Southeast Michigan or Western Michigan or Northern Michigan. They've got a group that really covers the entire state. And everything that they're doing, everything that they're talking about is driving toward that. We've got a governor who, the only thing he cares about is, are you interested in moving this state forward if you want to be a part of his team? If you want access to resources that the state has, are you interested in moving the state forward? He's not asking what region you're in, how much did the other region get. He's really focused on what it takes to move this state forward. And as an organization, we are going overboard to demonstrate that we're going to ignore this parochial nonsense and really focus on what's in the best interest of the state of Michigan. I'll give you one quick example. A couple weeks ago, we had the Pure Michigan 400. If you're a NASCAR fan, you probably saw it or went to the racetrack. We sponsored it. It was the Pure Michigan 400. Now, this is a big-time opportunity, national audience, 100,000 people in the stands, and we're trying to get access to decision makers. And there's a lot of suites at sporting events with corporate executives there. So we thought it'd be a neat opportunity for us to get access to those corporate executives, but also to bring in some corporate site selectors. And Michigan had gotten out of the business of working closely with corporate site selectors. And these are the folks who really influence corporate location decisions when there's big expansions going on. So we decided this would be a neat opportunity to get back into that business. We were sure we could get some folks that would be interested in NASCAR. And the problem was we only had about 6 weeks to get it done. Now, if you know how things move at the state level, 6 weeks, even in dog years, is not enough time. And the governor's got us working in dog years. But even in dog years, that was not enough time for us to pull it off. And one of our partners, it happened to be Southwest Michigan First, Ron Kitchen's organization, Ron said, we have great relationships with site consultants, and we would love to put this program together for the state. And we said, fine. And we signed a contract with Ron and his team to put the program together over the complaints of a lot of other people from other parts of the state who were concerned that this was going to be a Southwest Michigan site consulting event and no one else would have access. Ron and his team went out of their way to include everybody across the state. Detroit area, Grand Rapids area, Traverse City area. I mean, we covered the entire state. It could not have gone better. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to do. It's just one example. We've got to do that as a habit as opposed to with a lot of forethought. At this point, we have to really, really think about it and ensure that everybody's on the same page. But when we start doing it kind of in an automatic mode, then we'll know we're there. We're certainly not at that point yet. But this parochialism is killing our state. And I think the stuff the Business Leaders from Michigan is doing, and Bill has been a wonderful leader in that regard, is a good starting point from the business sector.
Bill, anything to add?
No, I can just echo what was said. And that's that the Business Leaders for Michigan, you're not allowed to just look after your area. We're all Michiganders, first and foremost. And the same thing with the Southwest Michigan First, which was a Kalamazoo County economic focused under the leadership of your group, MEDC. We've now expanded to 8 regions. And we used to kind of fight over who was going to get the next Welch's grape juice plant. And now we're just so long as it's in Michigan, we're all happy. And I think that attitude is going to make the difference. And it's definitely there. And we got to be, it doesn't matter if we're doctors, lawyers, drug developers, Democrats, Republicans, but we've got to be Michiganders. And if we can have that attitude, we will win.
Well, that's a great note to end on. So I'd like to have you all join me in thanking both Mike and Bill for coming in tonight. Thank you all for coming tonight. Appreciate it.